Hello and welcome to this video. Today we're going to be talking about setting up your SmartyCam 3 Sport. Now, since this camera came out a couple of months ago, I've had a number of questions that have come through either the channel or on email asking what's the best way to be able to set up the device, how is it different to the existing SmartyCam, and is there anything I need to do differently to be able to make sure I get the most out of this particular device. And so we're going to have a look at that today. We're going to start by looking at the actual settings on the back of the device and having a look at some of the updates you can do. Then we're going to get into the actual MicroSD card, putting it in the device itself, then getting it into your PC, uploading all the configurations, the firmware, the tracks, everything you need, then getting it back in the camera and making sure you're updated. And so without further ado, let's get into the tutorial. Right, before we get into Race Studio 3 and we start configuring the device itself, the first thing we need to do is connect the SD card or the MicroSD card to the SmartyCam. This couldn't be easier. What I've done here is I've factory reset my SmartyCam 3 Sport. I'm just going to pop it open like that, and I'm going to take this MicroSD card that I have, which I've also formatted, and I'm just going to pop one into the other and just connect it. Now, typically what happens on the screen is that just like any SmartyCam, and if you've never owned one, this is what happens, is that the system is going to effectively format and configure that SD card, and when it's ready, it's going to show you how much space is going to be available on that SD card. Now, what this is effectively doing is telling the SD card that it's connected to this particular SmartyCam. You can see that if this focuses on not, it's not focusing, but it doesn't matter. It says SD card getting ready. Now that it's ready to go, what we need to then be able to do is to then get this SD card formatted in Race Studio 3 Analysis. So that's the next thing that we're going to do. Right, now that I have plugged in the MicroSD card into the PC, the next thing we need to do is to be able to configure that so that we can upload these configurations into the SmartyCam 3 Sport. To do that, we're going to use Race Studio 3, so I'm going to transition over. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on this particular arrow here. Now, I know for many of you who use this with a dash or with a logger, there's usually a little green arrow that appears. Don't worry, it's actually doing the same thing. And if I click here, the first thing you're going to notice is that over here, we've got this SD card for the SmartyCam 3 Sport. And so effectively that micro SD card is mimicking a connection with the actual device itself. We notice that there's a firmware that's updated on available for that particular update. There's probably going to be no tracks. If I click there, there's no data to download because we haven't run anything yet. And similarly, there's no tracks updated. So we've got a lot of things that we want to be able to do. So we can whittle these down one by one, and so the first thing we may want to be able to do is update the firmware. So I can click here. It's going to take me to the update page, and if I scroll down, you can see that there is an update for the SmartyCam 3 Sport. I've downloaded it onto my Race Studio 3. I just need to get it onto this SD card. So I click on Update Device, it's going to show up there, and all I need to do at this particular point is click on Update Device. What it's going to do is it's going to do a firmware update, and it's going to put that update on the SD card. So that's the first thing that needed to get done and is being done there, which it says it will be loaded when you import it or add it into the device. So I'm going to click on OK, and I'm going to click on Exit, and that's the first thing. Now that hasn't gone away because we haven't updated the device yet. It will do next time we go there. The next thing we may want to think about is putting some tracks on there. If I click here to the track area, one of the things we can do is go into the track manager, and down here we have the SmartyCam Sport. So we can add tracks in here. For example, if I wanted to add in Castle Combe, where I was last racing, I can just click there. It will find Castle Combe, and I can drag it over and just upload it onto the device. And so now there's a track that's loaded onto the SD card for the device as well. But the most important thing we want to be able to do is configure how the device actually shows the data on screen. So we're going to set that up in two ways. The first thing we're going to do is make sure our SmartyCam stream from our dash or our logger is set up correctly. And then the second thing we're going to do is going to configure that experience. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on this gear icon here, and what we're going to do is log into, or just load up this particular page. And you can see I've got a ton of configurations here. But if I click on devices, I want to be able to go to Evo 4S because that's the device that I have set up. And I was going to use that as a demonstration for today's particular configuration tutorial. If I load up this configuration, one of the things that you're going to notice is over here, there's the SmartyCam stream. Now, if anyone's seen the tutorial where I talked about setting up a SmartyCam, this hasn't really changed much regardless of whether you have a SmartyCam 2.1, 2.2, or whether you're using one of the new Sport 3s and so 3 Sports. And so in many respects, let's just make sure that's set up correctly. If I click here, what it's going to do is it's going to make sure that all of these particular channels are set up. This is for the SmartyCam 3, and if I'm running them side by side, which is what I did just a few weeks ago, you can make sure that your SmartyCam 2 stream is set up. This will just make sure that depending on the device that's connected to your CAN network or your connected AiM network, we'll be getting the necessary information to be able to ensure that that is rendered on screen and on the video as it's recorded. So here, there's another thing you can see. There's a little bit more in terms of channels available. Notice this numbering here. On the SmartyCam 2, it goes up to 14, then jumps to 17. That's because on the SmartyCam 3, you actually have a couple more channels here, which are the lateral acceleration and inline acceleration. So you get a little bit more information being passed to the SmartyCam 3 than you did from the SmartyCam 2. There is another feature we can set up, which is a very advanced feature, so for 99% of us we won't use this, is that we can actually create our own stream of data that goes to the SmartyCam. And this is an option if we want to be able to send our own variables from our own setup and our own configurations. We might have our own ECUs, or we might be able to write our own channels. For most of us, however, we're just going to click on default, which is the series of channels which are set up. And again, if you're not sure on how to set this up, please click on the link either in the description or in the top right-hand side of this video to find out how to be able to do that. So once that's all set up and that's running, I will caveat at this point, there's one very important thing to make sure if you're running a SmartyCam 3 Sport, is that wherever you're sending the data from, in terms of, in this instance, it's an Evo 4S, you've updated the firmware to the very latest so that the dash is talking to the new camera. If you've got an old version of the firmware on your actual logger or dash, it may not be sending the right signals to the SmartyCam 3 Sport, and as a result, it may not work properly. And I've heard of scenarios like that happening. But once this is all set up, the most important thing for us to be able to do is actually set up the way we want it to look when we're recording sessions. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to all here. We're still in this area of configuration, and we're going to click on new. And right now it's trying to configure a new Evo 4S, so I'm going to go to all configurations so it allows me to see them all. I'm going to click on new again, and now I have all the devices available to me. Now, because I've configured a SmartyCam 3 Sport before, it shows up here. If not, all you need to do is scroll down and you'll find it down here at the bottom. So if I click here and I click on OK, I can call this SmartyCam 3 Sport, and I can do it for the tutorial, and I can click on OK. What this is going to do is it's going to allow me to then set up the SmartyCam itself. Now, you've got two options to start off with. You've got connected to master or standalone. You can actually use this as a standalone item, especially if you've got a GPS module attached to it that allows you to be able to use this without any kind of dash or logger. But what I'm doing, and what most people do, is they have a SmartyCam connected to their overall network of AiM devices, which is usually a logger and a dash and maybe a wheel and a few other things. And so that's all part of that network. And that's where most people use this, but you can use it on your own as a standalone item. So the first thing you're going to see is this is the overlay, and your indicator is here. You also have parameters. This just gives you an idea. If you're on a standalone, you can set up the parameters, because we are using this as a master, as in connected to the main device. Your logger, we're not going to use it. And then we've got the CAN protocol, which we're using. The stream is the AiM stream, which is the standard one that you'll see here matches whatever we set up here. So this here is the stream that's coming in. And so if I go back to the SmartyCam 3 Sport, that's the stream that shows up there. So effectively, if we look at this, oil temperature is coming in from the oil temperature channel. So when I set it up in the SmartyCam here, this oil temp will represent whatever that is. It's in centigrade, and it's measured in 0.01, so a decimal place on the actual view. Now, we're going to go back to overlay, and so the first thing we want to be able to do is to customize this. And so the most important thing for us is to be able to know how we want this to be seen. Now, what's really important here is to identify how your camera is set up based upon what kind of vehicle you have and where that camera is pointed. Because, for example, if you think about this scenario here, if this is a true depiction of where your camera is going to be placed, the last thing you want to do is to drag and drop some kind of graphic that's right in the middle, because that obscures the view. So it's important to make sure you configure how you set up your car based on how you want it to be. So what you can do here is you can start moving these things around. For example, if you wanted to put that there, you can move it into that particular location. And then what you're going to find starts to happen is you're going to see this little box appear down at the bottom here. Now this is going to ask you what channel you want showing up in this area. So for example, if I wanted this to be RPMs, which I do, it's coming from the RPM channel. It's already set up, which is fine. And all I need to do here is configure the fact that my Formula Ford doesn't rev to 14,000 RPM. If it did, I don't think it would run any further and any more in that particular day. So I'm going to make it more realistic as to the RPMs on my device. I'm going to click there. Similarly, the GPS speed is indicating down here, so I can configure this down here and I can say it's miles per hour, starts at 1 and finishes at 160. Again, unrealistic for a Formula Ford, so let's make that more realistic of 120. And it may go above 120. I think we've even squeaked 130 out of my Formula Ford, but that's a more reflective indication of speed, plus you'll always have the actual miles an hour here on this particular setting. Last is the gear. And so when we think about gear, I have that also set up right now in my setup. That's a calculated gear, but if you have an ECU, you can use that as a particular channel. So that's how that's set up. And these sort of clusters are always very useful to use. Similarly, you have some other options that are available now, which I particularly like, which we had in the other one, but there are other particular variables which are useful. For example, if we wanted to be able to set up the time variables, so for example, I could put in lap time here. That's one option, but I also have an option of being able to change what that lap time is. So I'm going to add a second one here. And by adding a second one here, I can change what's available here. Now I can do this in one of two ways. I can drag and drop, or I can just pick, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go in and say, okay, I want this one to be the lap time that I'm on, and I want this one to be my best lap. So if you notice here, it says best lap. If I hold the mouse down here and I drag it to this particular box here, now it says the best lap time of that particular session, but I want one more. And this is one of the coolest new features that people have asked for a very long time with this particular device, which is, can you make it so that I can see the predictive lap time while I'm watching the video? The answer is yes. So what you can do is you can put another one of these particular lap times here, just drag that up there, pop it in. And then what you can do here is you go to your lap channels, and you can go down here to predictive time or plus minus, depending on what you want. Let's say plus minus, and we can drag that here and drop it in. That was the second way I was mentioning earlier as to how you want to be able to make these work. And now all of a sudden you have listed here your lap time, your best time, and your test best lap time that you've had. Similarly, there are some other variables you may want to be able to put in here to customize. You may want a track map, so you may want to drag a track map up here, which will then render on the particular screen. And then similarly, depending on what you're doing, you may want to add one of your own logos. I might just want to be able to drag in a SmartyCam 3 logo down here. You can put anything you like on here, and there you have your configuration set up. All I need to do now is click on save, and that's available for me to be able to use. And so there we've set up, and there's so many different variations. I've just done the most simple sort of example. I can actually add to this. One of the things that people often ask is, how can I see throttle position? Well, if I go back to the set and I'm going to go here, there's this thing called the barograph. What I can do is I can drag that in here, and on that barograph, the channel's not set, but I want that to be throttle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the CAN protocol, which is the feed that's coming in from the dash. So this will give us the throttle position sensor. It's available in my car. I can go in here, scroll down, say I would like throttle position, drag that there, and I can either drop it in there or I can drop it in here. And did I drop that? I didn't drop it particularly well. I'm just going to drop it again, make sure it's there. There it is, it shows up. I can have it in certain decimals. I can have it down to a single decimal, starts at 0, finishes at 100. Here it shows, so 1,000, that's only for configuration. And therefore we've got that set up. So what it's now going to show is it will show me the percentage throttle. Similar, if you want to be able to see engine temps, all sorts of things you can set it up depending on how you want to be able to view your particular setup. Again, just click on save and you're done, but you're not done. And this is where it gets really important, and I messed this up the other day, so I encourage you all to be able to make sure you do this yourselves, is that you click on transmit. What that's going to do is that's going to send the overlay configuration to the SD card. Now that's in the SD card, you can then upload it to your SmartyCam 3 Sport. If you didn't do that and you forgot, you wouldn't be able to use that configuration. I think that's really important to be able to do. Now, probably everyone's like, well, I knew that, but I messed it up the other day, so let's make sure that we do that. Once we've done that, we're ready to go. So we've done all the things we needed to do to get this particular device set up. If we go back into the device itself, or if we click here, we've updated the firmware, we've added tracks, and then we've gone into the configuration and we've overlaid that. That's all on the SD card, and that's all we need to do now in Race Studio 3. The rest is actually doing it on the device itself. Right, so now I'm going to plug the SD card back into the SmartyCam 3 Sport, and we're going to configure it from there. Right, now that it's checked the SD card, the next thing we need to do is to start working through the menu and updating the settings. So we're going to click on this arrow here, and we're going to click on the down arrow, which is the X, until it gets to update. I'm going to select it, and I've got these three options. Now, if you remember from the configuration file, we had a firmware update, we had a configuration update, and we had tracks to be able to load on the device. And those match the options that are available in this particular menu. So we'll start with the firmware, and we're going to click on select. And what it's doing is it's looking for the files, and once it's found them, it will give us the opportunity of being able to update the device itself. Right, now that it's found the files and it's updated them, it's just asked us if we want to update. So I'm going to click on select. Am I sure? I'm going to hit the X button for yes, and the system's going to upload the file with the new firmware attached. So now that it's finished updating the firmware, it's asking us to press any key, which we will, and it will reboot the system, and then we will move on to the next update, which will be the configuration. Right, the next thing we want to be able to do is to configure the view or the configuration or the overlay. So that's the next thing we're going to update. So what we're going to do again is we're just going to go back in. We're going to click on the down arrow, which is the X. We're going to click on update, and we're going to click on the X to go down, and now we're going to go to configuration. Hit the triangle again, and it's going to say upload the configuration, and it's just going to upload the one that we set up earlier on Race Studio 3. Okay, now that that configuration has successfully uploaded, the last thing we need to do are the tracks. Now this is optional. Typically, if you're running in a scenario where the tracks are available from your dash or logger, you will not need to do this. However, if you're running this as a standalone, you will need to do this to be able to make sure the GPS can identify where you are. So I'm going to click out of here, and I am going to scroll down with the X arrow to tracks. I'm going to click on select, and it's just going to load up the same way it did everything else. Now I only had one track on there, so it was relatively quick. So it's updated those final pieces of information. Now, that's all you need to do with the SD card. If you ran right now, your SmartyCam Sport 3 would work perfectly. But there are a few other things that you may want to be able to adjust based upon the settings on the back of the device. Now, we won't change them all, but if we click on the exit button here, we can see that there are other options available. If we click and hold down this button, we go back to the circle. That's the beauty of the buttons on the back. A quick press is 1, for example, at the top here. A quick press is the X. A hold for a little bit longer is the circle. So that helps you understand how to be able to use two functions in one button. Now, there's a few things to select here that I changed. And if I click on the down arrow, there weren't many. What I did was I went into the settings, and I click on the select file, and in here I actually changed a few variables. Now, if you're running this upside down, you've got the flip over functionality, just in case you wanted to be able to mount this upside down, that was easier. However, the only features that I actually changed, if I click on the down arrow, but please feel free to go in and change all of your own, is I made sure that the system time was updated, so that when you actually log the SmartyCam file, you actually know at what time the session was run. That's really useful for analysis in Race Studio 3 analysis. Similarly, the other one which is really important to set is exposure. So if I click down here and I click on the select button, it gives you the option of changing the focal point. So if you notice on here, there's a red rectangle. That means it's understanding it's not spot exposure, it's actually exposure is being controlled on the whole screen. You can change that, however, by clicking there, and you can change it to certain points based upon where your camera is mounted in the vehicle that you're running. So for example, if you happen to have this mounted on your roll cage on the right-hand side of your car because your car is left-hand drive, you may want to be able to make sure the exposure is focused on the main window in front of you. Similarly, if you've got it right in front of you, and you can change where that actually happens. It just makes sure that you've got settings that are there. And that's a very useful thing to be able to have. Apart from that, the other variables are up to you to be able to change as you see fit. One of the most important things on a SmartyCam I will leave you with is one of the key variables is when the system decides to automatically start recording. Now, in many instances, this is set by the dash or the logger, but it's important to be able to make sure that you have the system understanding how to auto start and stop. In this case, it's auto, but you can change that. Again, work around these settings. But once you're done, that's it. The system is ready to go. If I keep holding down this button here, you'll go back to the screen, and now your SmartyCam 3 Sport is ready to go, and you're ready to use it at the track. Thanks so much for watching this video. Hopefully now you've got a better idea in terms of how to be able to set up these wonderful little cameras. If you have any continual questions or challenges setting up your device, please write it in the comments box below. I do my best to be able to answer every question that comes in. Sometimes it may take a day or two to be able to get to all the questions that I have to answer, but I will do my best to be able to get back to you. That just leaves me to say thanks so much for watching this video. Please give it a thumbs up. That just helps more people see this video with the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe if you want to see more of these. And thanks so much for watching.